3 weeks from today, Republican-affiliated voters here in Kansas will get to choose who represents their party in the 2018 Kansas governor election. Joining me now is Republican primary candidate Jim Barnett and his lieutenant governor candidate Rosie Hansen. So how are you guys doing today?
Terrific, thanks. Glad to be here.
Yeah, welcome to Hayes. I don't know if this is your first time.
Oh, no. We have been here many times. Yeah, we love to come to Hayes, and we always find an excuse to go to Gellis as well.
Really? I've yet to be in the Gellis, actually.
Oh, well, we'll
I've
be
been
there
here a year and have not gone to Gellis.
Oh, my goodness. Well, we love coming to Hayes. Thank you.
All right. Well, let's get to know you guys a little bit better. What's your story, and why are you guys running for governor and lieutenant governor?
I'll start, if it's okay. My name is, again, Jim Barnett. I grew up on a small farm near Redding, Kansas by Emporia. Loved farming, but had asthma and hay fever as a kid, so decided not to farm. I've practiced medicine 36 years and 17 days as of today. I served on the school board in Emporia. I have served in the Kansas Senate. I just have been in private practicing medicine since 2010. But in August of 16, I saw a new legislature elected. And by that, I mean a legislature just willing to fix the mess we got into with the tax experiment. Kansans elected legislators who were willing to go to Topeka and just cast the votes necessary to make this state solvent again and give a new economic foundation. So we thought, wow, if the state would elect that kind of legislature, maybe they'd elect that kind of governor. So we started driving our red F-150 around the state, drove around a year, just asking Kansans what they saw as problems and what they saw as answers. We found out that Kansans knew the problems, they knew the answers, they just needed someone to listen to them. So we decided to run on 6 main topics: ag and livestock, water's a big issue there, by the way, economic development, that's the greatest challenge for the next governor, education, healthcare, tourism, that's an economic engine still parked in the garage, and young professionals. How do we attract and retain young people in this state? So that's my brief story, and I'd love to let Rosie tell hers, or however you want to go about that.
Sure, yeah. I'm Rosie Hansen, and I grew up in Americus, Kansas. Educated at Emporia State and KU, and then I spent 26 years as a Foreign Service officer, living and working overseas in American embassies, and in fun places like Bosnia, Afghanistan, Kuwait after the Gulf War. I worked with the embassies in the former Soviet Union after the Soviet Union broke up, and kind of acted as a management consultant working with the folks in our embassies there. So I had a wonderful career focused on management, government efficiency throughout my career. And when Jim, when we were driving down the road one day, he said, I know who I want my lieutenant governor to be. And I said, who? And he said, you. And I said, no.
Turn me down.
I did. I said, you're crazy. I'm not a politician. And he said, well, that's why you would be good. And I really was not ready to say yes at that point. But, as time went on and we talked more about various issues, I thought about it. And actually, we were back in that truck again, and we were having a conversation about DCF, Department of Children and Families, and about how dysfunctional it's been. And I said, I could really help with that. And he said, yes, you could. But if you want to do that, you have to be on the inside, not on the outside. And so he just these little issues just kept coming up, and those were the kinds of conversations. And eventually I realized when you kind of see a way you can make a difference, you need to step up. I said, okay, I'll step up, I'll do it. And here I am.
So what, just out of curiosity, after seeing most of the world, I would assume, what brought you back to Kansas?
Yeah.
Well, I grew up in Americus. So I came back to Kansas all the time to visit my folks, my brother, my sister, and so I've had property here for a long time. So it was a natural thing to come back to Kansas. But the reality of what brought me back to Kansas was Jim Barnett. So that's how I got back here, and that's where we are.
All right. Well, let's talk about some of the issues that you guys have listed on your joint website. On the topic of economy, which you have mentioned already, you have 4 main pillars, as you call them, that include progressing areas such as workforce development and education, a regional approach to the issue, identifying and supporting high potential and high performing industries, and enterprising academics. Why do you believe such a plan would actually work here in the state of Kansas?
Yeah, great question. Well, first of all, The number one challenge for the next governor is economic growth. Our state has been stagnant. We actually had an economy that contracted in 2017. The tax experiment hurt our state badly. So we committed to asking businessmen and women around the state, what do you need to grow? And that's how we came up with this plan. Now, the first pillar is really getting the basics back. We asked, what do you need to succeed in your business? And people told us over and over again, workforce training, infrastructure, education, healthcare, quality of life to bring people to Kansas as opposed to another state. 7th or 8th on that list consistently was taxes. Brownback and Collier put all their eggs in one basket of zeroing out taxes for a certain few and let all the rest go to the wayside. So the next governor and lieutenant governor has to reestablish workforce training, infrastructure, education, healthcare, quality of life issues. And that's going to take a while, and it's going to take some money. We have 50,000 open jobs right now in this state that we can't fill. That's pillar number one. Pillar number two, our state's very different regionally. Now, this sounds like a no-brainer, but this part of the state is much different than Johnson County, which is much different than southeast Kansas, which is much different than southwest Kansas. The last time we approached economic development on a regional basis was when Bill Graves was governor. It's been that long. What was our last approach to economic development under Brownback and Collier? It was zeroing out taxes. That was it. That was the plan, and it hurt the state badly. Now, regional differences with one caveat. When I would visit with chambers of commerce, and we met with your chambers of commerce here, your director, we also met with Aaron White, who's very much involved with economic development in Hayes. They pounded into our heads that 95% of economic development is local. So local control is one caveat. Where that went wrong in Kansas is Tonganoxie. They tried to bring in the Tyson chicken plant. Community didn't know about it. The community found out about it and they erupted and that program imploded. So regional differences, local control. Third thing is this. We used to think our state was just ag and aviation and oil. Those are big sectors, but they're not by far what all we do. Education, finance, logistics, IT, cybersecurity, military, the list is long. So we need to look regionally at what is present and what can we do before and after to make our economy grow beyond just those 4 areas. The last point is this, and I want to tell you just a real brief story. I was visiting with a very successful businessman in Kansas City. He said, Jim, I ship out 3,000 jobs a year to Bangalore, India, because I don't have people trained in this area in IT. And the other successful person in the room said, yeah, so we ought to be teaching computer coding in 2nd grade. Across the state ought to be fun, but we're not. So I realized we need a new relationship between business and education. I called it enterprising academics. What I mean by that is, if you're business and I'm education, you should come to me as an educator and say, Jim, here's what I need in my business in workforce or training to make our business grow. If I'm an educator, I should be going to you and say, Jaden, what do you need in your business? What can we do to train, help facilitate that so we can grow our economics in this state? It's a win-win for both. We'll have more money for schools and your business will do well. Those are the 4 pillars of what a real economic development plan could look like. We also met with Claire Gustin right here in Hayes at Sunflower. We wanted her opinion. Those people know what we need.
Okay. So you're not the only candidate to want to do something along the similar lines of working with businesses and the communities to build a workforce. But how does this relate, in your views, to individuals who, and I'll tell my own story, I'm staying in Kansas to get my education before most likely moving out of the state for my own reasons. But how does that relate to individuals such as myself who are only here just for their education, not for the workforce?
Yeah, so we picked 6 topics. Young professionals is one of them. And Jaden, if you want to leave this state, of course you have that right, but we'd like for you to have an opportunity to stay here. So we recognize this as we traveled and listened to Kansans. You know, we raise and educate all these great young people and then many of them leave. Why? Number one is economic opportunity. You don't have the jobs here, and so we can do much better in this state if we commit long-term to economic growth with the things we just talked about. Young people want to have a sense of community, and that is important. They want to feel a part of something bigger. We ought to be focusing on that. Let me give you a little story about Garden City. There's an economy that's booming in Garden City. They have a river that goes through Garden City, the Arkansas River. It's bone dry. They also have a dairy plant, a new dry powder dairy plant. They sell their products to China. They don't trust their own dry powder milk because their people have been poisoned and died from it. Right. Well, they have water left over from that plant. One of the ideas they have is to build a river walk. Think about that, a river walk in Garden City. Why? cafes, coffee shops, internet, places to stay, places for young people to come and live. We've found other places across the state that are committing to this too. Manhattan, they've got a new web design business in Manhattan, but they can't attract the people they need to work there. So they're looking at trails, bike paths, and so forth. So other places like Emporia, disc golf, opportunities that attract young people. So as a state, we need to commit to that so we can keep you here.
Okay. So you've already mentioned you wanted to start technical skills training through the K through 12 level, and you've mentioned second grade. Is that the grade level that you would personally want to try and start these programs at?
You know, computer coding really should be taught across the state at second grade, but you know, you have to look at each level differently. Honestly, if we are really going to focus, and we do want to really focus on economic growth, we need to go younger than that. I'll tell you another little story. We were in Concordia working on, again, an economic development package and asking businessmen and women, what do you need? They said, Jim, we can't get people to show up to work, pass a drug test, look you in the eye, shake your hand. What are you going to do about that? You know, we travel the state to find an answer for that, Jaden. There are many places we found those answers, including in Wichita and in Coffeyville, Kansas, southeast Kansas. In southeast Kansas, businesses have come together. They raised over $1 million locally to start an early childhood learning center for young children that grow up in families where they're not read to, sometimes abused, neglected, sometimes molested, come to school, don't know the color blue, and then it's a teacher's fault they don't learn. If you help those children early, they can be successful in life and become productive citizens and taxpayers. So why in Coffeyville would businesses go about donating money to develop that center? In Coffeyville, they can't find someone to show up to work, pass a drug test, look you in the eye, shake your hand. We have a generational failure of families, generational parenting in the state. This is based off work done in Wichita. Barry Downing, a philanthropist who years ago recognized those kids could be helped, started his own program. Longitudinally, those kids, if helped, get out of high school, stay out of jail, have a job, earn $2,000 more a month, own a home, have a family. So if this state is really going to address long-term economic growth issues, we have to start early. And it will work and help law enforcement. Law enforcement will tell you, we've met with them, if you would invest in early childhood situations like that, they're going to stay out of our jails. They're going to stay out of our mental health facilities. They're not going to have monthly checks coming from the state and federal government because they're going to be employed.
Okay. And for technical skills also, how does this relate to individuals who may not be interested in such areas? And would you make this more of a requirement to the educational program rather than optional? No,
let's not make it a mandate.
Okay.
Mandates don't work well. It's a private-public partnership between a school district, or a community. It should be that. And very much we support this Kansas redesign that's going on with Randy Watson, who's now our Commissioner of Education. You had your prior Commissioner of Education, Andy Tompkins, out here temporarily as your president. They're both great individuals. But, you know, back in the 90s, we said everyone should go to college. Now, college works for lots of people. You, Jaden, I'm a physician, came up from a small farm. Rosie's an attorney. But we have lots of opportunities that don't necessarily require the 4-year degree or more. So that is what is really cool, and that's happening across the state and right here in Hayes too, where we look at career and technical ed. And those opportunities for plumbers, electricians, wind turbine technicians, automotive technology, corrosion in oil and gas, those jobs are good paying jobs. And what we need to then look at is post-secondary success and change our focus from how many credits are we focused on for kids, but how can we get a successful career started for them.
Right. And I'm going to ask you, since it's just been revealed that you are an attorney. I did not actually know that. Do you practice in a specific area of law?
No,
or?
I actually practiced law 3 years before I was in the Foreign Service. So it's been quite a while since I was a practicing attorney. But I do have a law degree and did use that as a practicing attorney for 3 years. And I did a number of different things, including low-income housing and real estate work and some small litigation as well, before I ended up going into the Foreign Service and being a Foreign Service officer for 26 years.
So I'm going to mainly ask you, and feel free to chime on this as well. The Kansas Supreme Court recently said that the past legislative funding does not fit under the Kansas Constitution. What are your thoughts personally, and of course related to your position, on that subject? And like I said, feel free to chime in whenever you feel.
Well, sure. So we have separation of powers for a reason.
Right.
And the Supreme Court is looking at the Constitution. There have been some candidates who've said that they're saying how much money has to be spent. They've never said that. They've looked at the Constitution to figure out, is what Kansas is doing constitutional? Are we providing an equitable and adequate education for our kids? And that's their appropriate role to determine that. And I think that one of the issues is the standards that the Supreme Court is looking at. And they're looking at standards that were passed by a 2014 legislature that are really not very measurable and not really pertinent standards. They come out of Kentucky in the 1980s. And what we need in Kansas are standards that are pertinent to today's students and to our Kansas students. That means we need leadership in the office of governor that's going to look at how to create those new standards. They need to be measurable. We need accountability built into that system. And I think that we have with Kansans Can right under our nose some of the standards that we probably ought to be looking at. One of those is on the front end, are kids ready for kindergarten? And on the back end of that, can they get a job? And there's a few things in the middle that work in there too. But what we need to be doing, leadership-wise, the governor needs to bring together parents, educators, legislators, the State Board of Education, all of the business, all of the relevant players around the table to develop that set of standards that's pertinent to kids in Kansas today. And if we did that and then built in an inflation factor so that we give the schools some stability, I think we would be out of court. It's a leadership failure in the office of governor that's perpetuated this situation. It's not a Supreme Court failure. And the issue is not the courts, the issue is the kids. Right. We should be educating our kids and thinking about what's best for them and stop all of this other nonsense. It's just time for that.
Okay. Any comments?
Well said. Terrific. Yeah. Economic development and education are joined at the hip. If we don't invest in our kids and invest in our state, we're not going to grow this state's economy.
Okay. And you've already mentioned it's a leadership issue. Now, there's been a lot of talk about trying to implement either an amendment to clarify parts of the Constitution, and there's another candidate who I won't say who, but is in support of going back to the 1992 school system. Any comment on that, on either subject from either of you?
Well, you know, the legislature has considered a constitutional amendment many, many times. It's never passed. And this is all politicization. It's polarization, and it's trying to distract from the real issue. The real issue, again, is leadership in our kids. And I'll tell you this, we've traveled a state, Tribune, out by the Colorado border. They have school 4 days a week because they can't stay open, can't afford to stay open 5 days a week. Waukegan has no band, no driver's ed, the only internet. The only foreign language in Waukegan is on the internet, but yet a school on the east side of the state may be teaching immersion Chinese in 2nd grade. So it's clearly been inequitable and inadequate in those circumstances. So a constitutional amendment is not the real issue. It's not the real problem. It's a matter of leadership and funding our schools. That's what we care about.
Okay. All right. Now, you've already mentioned tourism in terms of economic development, which is not something most people think of when it comes to Kansas, I might say. And it has its own 5-point plan that you measure. Not for most people, though, that I've spoken to, a lot of people have perceived Kansas as flat and boring. So how exactly would you make Kansas an attractive tourist site and develop that part of the economy?
I'll start off, and we both just love to talk about that. We have over 80,000 miles on that red F-150 parked outside, traveling this state. By the way, original tires, I still can't believe how much tread is on those tires. One new windshield, we got rocked to death in Wichita, okay? We were going from Mays to meet with the chief of police and got behind a dump truck. Listen, this state is a beautiful state, and it is very diverse with all kinds of natural beauty to it. The fastest growing segment of our economy has been tourism without hardly any money put into it. So we commend those involved in the tourism industry, how they've been able to do this on a shoestring budget. And those are pure economic dollars that should be brought into the state. But it's also a marketing and an image issue. We are a state that has black eyes around the nation. We have black eyes internationally. And we wonder, why do people not want to come here? Why can't we fill those 50,000 open jobs? Well, that's part of the problem. We look like a state that can't put money in the bank for a highway program, can't stay out of court for schools. So we need to change our image, and so it's partly that as well. We can talk to you about the beauty of the state from corner to corner and every part in between. But if we have a governor who will promote this state and a marketing plan and put some dollars to invest into, you might think of the Pure Michigan branding. Well, we don't have to use their branding, but there's a lot we could do to make this state much more than just a flyover state, a destination state. And that's how we start growing our economy and changing our image nationwide.
And we just need to get people off the interstate and into the real heart of the state. And because if all you see is the interstate, then you could say it's a little bit flat, maybe not that interesting. But it doesn't take very far driving off that interstate before you, I mean, there's interesting places on the interstate too, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't take long to get off the interstate and back into the small areas of Kansas to find out how diverse and beautiful the state really is. And I think a little bit of imagination and a little bit of marketing really could help. There are people who live in cities who really just don't even understand or realize that this kind of open space exists. And if you marketed that correctly and built in some of the things that you need to support a tourist industry, you could have pretty major economic growth pretty simply and pretty cheaply, I think. That would really help the state.
You mentioned the state has black eyes. Why do you think that Kansas has earned this black eye reputation, per se?
Well, I largely place that blame on Brownback and Collier. Their tax disaster hurt the state, and we became the butt of jokes around the nation, looking at this state and seeing us struggle, and yet saying everything's working. We had this my way or the highway approach from Brownback and Collier, this ideological approach to governing that wasn't working. So we have to be a state that looks much more than that, and we have to be a state that is willing to invest in Kansas. We've become a state that lives month to month and paycheck to paycheck. Brownback and Collier institutionalized debt in our state. It's even worse than that. We've become a credit card debt state. If you look at money we spend on resurfacing highways, it's bonded money, interest-only payments for 20 years. So those roads we're resurfacing now with interest-only payments for 20 years will be worn out when our kids and grandkids are having to pay principal on them. So they wrecked the state. Now, there's a lot of good in Kansas, but we need a governor and a lieutenant governor who's willing to invest in this state. Any good farmer would tell you, don't eat your seed corn. Kansas ate its seed corn. We're willing to invest and bring investment back to the state and bring pride back to the state.
And let's touch on the position of lieutenant governor real quick. Now, a lot of people and any sort of position that's under the direct executive generally kind of phases into the background a lot. Nobody really knew much of Collier when Sam Brownback was leaving. How exactly, or I should ask, are you going to be an active lieutenant governor, and how will you be an active lieutenant governor?
Well, I sure hope so. That would be the plan. I mean, I don't understand why a lieutenant governor wouldn't be active, and I don't understand why a lieutenant governor in the past lieutenant governors in the past generally have not been full-time. Because it seems to me like there's plenty to do, and that includes continuing to do some of what we've been doing for the last 2 years, getting out to every part of the state, not sitting in Topeka and trying to govern without knowing what's going on in the rest of the state. So to do that, you need more than one person that's out there doing that. I think there's obviously Jim is the one who's going to really determine what the role of lieutenant governor is going to be, but I certainly wouldn't intend to fade into the woodwork. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's helpful for the state. I think that having two people who are committed to full-time focus on Kansas is exactly what the state needs. That's what we are both willing to do, is focus full-time on Kansas.
All right.
I just want to add to that, for instance, DCF, Department of Children and Families, is an example of a very broken system. It's just unspeakable. if you think of what's happened with children beaten, strangled, killed, encased in cement, killed and under bridges for 3 months to be found later, literally fed to the pigs on the east side of the state, Rosie will get in there and help fix that. It's going to take leadership and resources to do it, but we want to work together on that. Economic development is also huge. Markets, trade, you know, her expertise and involvement in the past in embassies around the world that support those that are engaged in new markets and existing markets. We need that. So she will be full-time. We will both be full-time. I do practice medicine now. I will step out of that medicine practice completely. Governor Collier still practices plastic surgery in Johnson County. It's a full-time job, governor and lieutenant governor.
You've mentioned the DCF a couple of times now, and recently there was that bill that was passed by the previous legislator that allows faith-based adoption agencies to deny adoption to LGBT couples. I was curious to where you might stand on that bill, because there's a lot of GOP that are in favor of it, from what it sounds like. Well,
I oppose it. I would have vetoed that bill. That is the most discriminatory bill passed in this Kansas legislature in years. It is purely discrimination. I would have vetoed that. We will not discriminate in our administration. So I want to make that very clear.
Okay. Now, I don't think a lot of people can argue that with 7 different Republicans running for governor currently, the 2 biggest names are, of course, current Governor Jeff Collier and Secretary of State Chris Kobach. How exactly do you two plan to win the Republican nomination going up against 7 other individuals?
Well, I appreciate that question a lot. You know, we're the only candidate that are not like Brownback and what Brownback and Collier were like. If you look at the major candidates out there, they're all saying we're going to fix this state by cutting taxes more and cutting services more. And that's exactly what got us into the mess we are here in now. So we are the only candidates that have invested heavily in actual policies and answers. And you're getting a sense and a flavor of what those policies are now. But we are not like them. Secretary of State Kobach has very high name recognition, but his unfavorable ratings are also very high. And Governor Collier is just like Brownback as well. Both of those, he's been an incumbent lieutenant governor 7 years. Nobody knew him. And now as governor, he basically took what the legislature did and claimed credit for that and took a lot of photo ops around the state. They're both still polling in the 20% range by their own polls. And by the way, how accurate is a poll? A poll is now representative of someone that still has a landline and will answer an unknown caller at night. All right? So they're not accurate. They really are not accurate. We feel very good about our chances. Now, we did not sign the debate agreement. The Republican Party came up with a debate agreement that we would not sign because it restricted who could ask questions and what questions could be asked. That's not what the Republican Party should be about. We should be a party of robust debate and respecting our Constitution, which is freedom of the press and freedom of speech. But I will tell you this, in the debates where Kobach and Collier have been present, Kobach has just flattened Collier, particularly in Johnson County just a week ago. He just flattened him. He's a weak candidate. And I don't care where the polls might say he is, but he's been knocked back. So you have two big names in the 20% range is what you have. We have a campaign of a governor, lieutenant governor, who really will bring answers and actually can save this state. So we feel good about our chances. Personally, we think it will be between Barnett and Kobach.
Really? Okay.
Yes.
All right, well, let me ask you this. If you were to condense your entire campaign, and both of you can answer this as well, as a single message to the Republican voters here in Kansas, because you got to get past the primaries first, how would you put that down into a single message, the entire campaign that you've been running on thus far?
Oh, I love that. Since we both get to answer, I'll let you go first if you want, and then I'll clean it up, okay?
Well, I would say it's our campaign theme, which is One Kansas. Hashtag One Kansas. That's what we're about. We came to it by listening to Kansans across the state. We heard the word one, the word unite, the words work together out of the mouths of Kansans over and over again. That's what people deeply desire. And we looked at each other and said the theme of our campaign needs to be One Kansas. Hashtag One Kansas, so that we're social media savvy. But that's really what it is. If we don't unite, we can't bridge the partisan divide in Topeka. We can't bridge the rural-urban divide. And it just is critical for bringing the state together. So that, to me, is the core of the campaign.
I love what she said, and I would just add, but take a little different direction, but One Kansas is the core of our campaign. If there's anything that describes the core of Rosie Hansen and Jim Barnett, it is uniting people to use common sense and solve problems. Jaden, the amount of poverty in Kansas it's astounding and disheartening. Our state is much different than what it used to be 7 years ago before Brownback and Collier took office. We have come down a long way. If we don't pivot and elect the right governor and lieutenant governor, we're going to lose Kansas like we used to know it and used to love it. It's going to take a full-time commitment, and it's going to take a governor or lieutenant governor who's going to lead on the hard issues and say, we've got to commit, we've got to invest. So we are the only Republican alternative. We are the Republican alternative to Brownback and Collier, or what would be perhaps worse, which would be with Kobach, in my opinion. We're the alternative. And if we don't elect the right governor in this state, we're going to lose it.
All right. Well, thank you guys for coming here. We appreciate you visiting us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you would like to vote for Jim Barnett and Rosie Hansen, be sure to cast your vote on August 7th, and of course be a registered Republican voter. If they make it past the primaries, you can vote for them come November 6th. For all your latest news, be sure to check out TigerMediaNet.com and all our social media. Thank you.